Call of Duty World at War is really fucking good. Not necessarily speaking for the multiplayer or the zombies, because the multiplayer is stuck in that really weird postmodern rainbow phase and the zombies isn't really my thing anymore. However, the campaign does so much right that its peers at the time didn't figure out and future installments just forgot altogether. I would hesitate to say that Call of Duty campaigns are underappreciated, as I've lost count of the amount of hour-long Modern Warfare retrospectives there are on YouTube, but World at War's single player sticks out to me as it does so many things so well, but just doesn't get that university thesis treatment that I think it kinda deserves. Before I go into the game itself, I want to talk about the time in which it was released and how I think it influenced the direction that the developers took. Call of Duty 1 through 3 and all of the Medal of Honors in between are comparatively very similar to each other, and at that time period you didn't really get much else. Lots of very standard Americans and very standard Germans shooting at each other, with contemporary media pretty much word for word being ripped off wherever you looked. There were definitely standouts like the Brothers in Arms series and the 3.5 theaters in Call of Duty 2. However, when you picture them all in your head, they all just kinda blend together. After the bombshell hit that was Call of Duty 4, Treyarch was faced with a bit of a dilemma. They're making a World War II game, and the previous installment was basically a giant middle finger to World War II games. In order to uphold the weight that the franchise held at the time, they had to do something that stood out, visually, thematically, and narratively. They took a look at all the previous World War II games and realized one key thing that they were missing. World at War is savage, it is fearless, it is dark. It is everything a World War II game should be, and everything a World War II game wasn't at the time. I mentioned earlier that contemporary media was a big influence on the genre at the time, and I think it was Treyarch's decision to move away from Hollywood World War II that allowed this much more gritty approach. The trend of World War II shooters was starting to overstay its welcome, so they knew they had to cap it off with something innovative. Granted, once that generation grew old and a younger one without memories of how boring the old games were, there were calls for a return to history. What a fucking mistake that was! Call of Duty World War II is actually a really good reference device for this analysis, because through comparison it exemplifies the care and passion that went into some of the older installments, and because World at War does not absolutely fucking suck. The first thing the game does is set its tone. Before you even start playing, you get this.
That intro gives me shivers every time I see it.
Other games were, forgettable. The main menu is just as impactful. I read a comment years ago in an OST video saying that as a kid, the commenter would try to enter the game before the singing started because it was just too scary for him. I don't blame him, it was pretty scary. A menu having this level of emotional impact is not something I see often, especially in World War II shooters or Call of Duty games as a whole. I see a lot of people saying that Call of Duty World at War's campaign is dark, and of course they don't mean literally, but it got me thinking about how the game gave people that idea. It's one thing I don't see talked about much, but I feel like a lot of this sentiment isn't just from all the burning corpses and severed limbs, but also subconsciously built by the game's color correction. Yeah, boring, I know, but bear with me here. Call of Duty games in the past are definitely no stranger to interesting color palettes, but I can't help but talk about the deliberate decisions made by the developers to make this game look how it wants players to feel. A trap a lot of modern media falls into, and a trap I've actually fallen into myself with my work, is having things look really nice without considering its purpose to the feel of the overall media. Battlefield 5 is a great example of this. The game looks fantastic, but it doesn't really do anything for the feel of the game, and it's ultimately just rather forgettable. The Pacific levels in World at War could have very easily been very green and sunny and tropical, but that wouldn't mesh well with the game's focus on its brutality. Cinematic is a buzzword that gets thrown around a lot when describing a game's look, but World at War's approach is quite literally parallel with TV and cinema, which kind of goes against the whole sentiment earlier about Treyarch moving away from Hollywood World War II, but this is by no means a bad thing. Visuals in media convey emotion, and World at War's direction reflects this well. The mission Little Resistance has some great examples of this done right, as does Eviction and Downfall from the Soviet campaign. Eviction is actually an incredible example of a lot of the things that this game does well, but check out its visuals throughout its sections. Despite being rainy, the exteriors are graded with purples and greens. It almost looks surreal, and surreality is actually an important aspect of the later Soviet campaigns. Take a look at this comparative environment from Battlefield 5, and then this level from Eviction. Sure, the Battlefield 5 environment looks great, but Evictions really stands out as artistic and different, you know what I'm saying. Still on the topic of visuals but equal parts mechanics is the game's intelligent use of blood and gore. The game's inclusion of more obvious blood decals and dismemberment I feel isn't just an outcome of advancing technologies, but a tool to further the game's pursuit of the brutality of war. It's no coincidence that blood and gore showed up when it did in the franchise, and no coincidence that it was absent from the Modern Warfare entries. The gore in World at War serves an explicit purpose of conveying World War II's ferocity and viciousness. The developers went out of their way to make firefights carry more weight. The feeling of looking over a pile of bodies in Call of Duty 2, for example, is nowhere near as impactful as a pile of bodies in World at War. Future installments, however, seem to have just forgotten the aesthetic importance of gore and just throw it in as a cool effect, or just missed the mark entirely. As mentioned, the gore also serves an important gameplay purpose, providing the player with effective hit and kill feedback without using fucking hit markers, as well as granting artificial power to a select few weapons. The Browning, for example, does less actual damage than rifles, yet it feels amazing because it just dismembers enemies. It also provides more incentive to use grenades, and gives grenades more satisfying feedback when you land them well. On the topic of gameplay, I also have to mention the enemy behavior between the two theaters. It's been discussed far better than I could already, but it's really incredible how the developers have put so much effort into juxtaposing these two armies. The Japanese lay wait camouflage in grass, they set up traps, they ambush the player, they conduct suicidal charges. This is how the Japanese fought in the Pacific Theater. Lots of guerrilla tactics and leaning on soldiers' suicidal fanaticism to stall the Allied advance as much as possible. The Germans behave a lot more like you'd expect any other conventional army to behave, pretty standard. They run away a lot. Oh, and they use more machine guns. You could argue that that was a deliberate decision because the Germans were all about machine gun doctrine, but yeah, I wouldn't give them too much credit. These differences between the two armies also very well illustrates the respect for history that the developers behind World at War had. Not only is it willing to respect its source material, but it's willing to actually confront it. This game shows you actual real footage of people dying. You assault the heart of the Nazi Reich and you are surrounded by swastikas. Nothing is censored in this game. There are a lot of things in this game that make it evident that the developers did more than 3 minutes of research, from the obvious like when the weapons show up and who's holding what weapon, to more subtle things like the enemy uniform variety and the evolution of uniforms from early war to late war. I like it how the weapon selection stays pretty in line with how they appeared in real life, which is something that should go without saying, but yeah, you know. Weapons like the STG-44 and G-43, which are late war models, appear only in the later stages of the campaign and in relatively subdued numbers. Even rarer weapons like the paratroopers FG-42 are confined to hidden areas. The Japanese Type 99 LMG also shows up in really small numbers, as does the American M1 carbine. Superficial details, I know, but small things like this illustrate the care that the developers took. There are also some weird inaccuracies, like the American Browning 1919 showing up on top of a Soviet T-34, that even though they were rarely fitted with AA machine guns at all, or German artillery pieces being wheeled by Soviets in Berlin. I mean, like, come on, there's a huge fucking Russian howitzer with its own tracks. Missed opportunity. These, however, are really just nitpicks and probably are a result of time constraints with development. I feel like if they were given more time, they probably would have done this right, but again, it changes pretty much nothing. COD World War II, on the other hand, like, what the fuck, what the fuck, what the fuck, what, like, why, what, what? In the obligatory tank gimmick level! The game throws 3 different types of tanks at you, and each have their own damage model. The Panzer IV is very easy to kill because it's older and thinly armored. The Panther takes a few shots to down, and the King Tigers just fucking eat shells, but all of them take more damage when you hit him in the sides and back. The game doesn't even make a big deal out of this, it's just there. It's just a sweet little detail. Another cool detail is the ad hoc bed spring armor on the late war T-34s, made specifically to combat the German anti-tank weapons by causing the warhead to detonate before it hits the armor. I get that I'm like a huge World War II nerd, and that's like a really dumb thing, but I'd like to point out that World at War is the reason that I know all these things. World at War made me research history. It really made me appreciate the Second World War, and just history as a whole. I'm gonna complain again about COD World War II because, the COD World War II's tank section, like, oh my fucking god, why can't the 76 long gun go through the front of a Panzer IV? Like, you fucking idiots, it could go through like 2 and like still kill people on the other side. What the fuck? I also mentioned enemy uniforms earlier. The soldiers you face evolve with the war. This is more noticeable on the Russian theater, but there's also some detail in the Japanese soldiers as well. Like how the soldiers in Makin Atoll are wearing these lighter uniforms with different service branch insignia as opposed to the tropical and darker uniforms in the rest of the campaign. The Germans' look changed significantly in the final stages. Throughout the campaign you're fighting some pretty standard looking Germans, you know, they got their sleeves all rolled up and they're all grey looking. But once you hit the Reichstag, you get a mixture of like SS units and honor guards and emaciated wounded soldiers. You get parade uniforms, each have their own sets of little like pins and medals. This is the last of Nazi Germany, like fleeing the onslaught of the Soviets by hiding in the Capitol building. I absolutely fucking love this. It illustrates the absolute desperation of the German forces towards the end of the war, as does a couple other little small details throughout the campaign. Speaking of enemy dialogue, I found this while editing the video, and this is just so cool. Not only do they have extra uniforms for the last dudes, but they have extra voice lines.
Für die Ehre des Reiches! Gebt euer Leben für den Führer! Berlin wird niemals euch gehören! Gebt euer Leben für das Deutsche Reich! Nehmt sie mit euch! Für den Führer! Deutschland über alles!
Oh, I got massively sidelined with history. I was meant to be talking about gameplay, which nobody is wondering about because everyone's already played this game and it's probably older than you. The gameplay is definitely a standout in the franchise, and definitely a standout among its contemporaries. The gunplay, however, is honestly a mixed bag. Some of the guns are brilliant, really punchy sounding and fun to use, while others are just kinda average at best. The M1 Garand, for instance, is really fun to use, but the statistically superior SVD-40s are really boring and just like unfun to use because its animations and sounds just aren't there. I'd happily pick up a Mosin over an SVT even though the numbers-wise worse in every way. The animations and sound for a weapon really make or break how fun they are to use, like nothing beats that. The level design, however, the level design is the best in any Call of Duty game. That's not my opinion, that's objective fact. No Call of Duty game has done levels better than World at War. Treyarch's subsequent game got nowhere near as good. Not to rag on Black Ops or anything, hallowed be thy name, but if you converted its actual walkable space into something visual, it would look an awful lot like hallways and hallways. You may be wondering what you're looking at here. You see, there used to be a time where developers didn't treat their players like apes, and gave players actual space and let them make decisions on where to go. On top of that, there's not a million things on screen telling you that you have to make a decision, that you have to fucking go somewhere, and there's no like dude yelling, "Miller, we have to go down path! I'm baby doodle brain!" You just go somewhere and shoot things. There are also multiple times throughout the campaign where two battles wage parallel to each other. There's also a hint of exploration. When I say exploration, you probably think of the death cards, and yes, that is a factor, but there's also another layer to it. Remember earlier when I said that certain weapons are rare and hidden in levels? There are dozens of little offshoots in Level Pass where you can find more powerful weapons if you know where to look. I shit you not, I've played this campaign for hundreds of hours, I cannot count the amount of times I've beaten it, and only just last week did I find this little room in Shuri Castle with two soldiers that ambush you and a couple of nice guns. There are all sorts of hidden machine guns across both theaters. There's little hidden shotguns, there's hidden snipers. Because I'm a huge nerd, I like sticking to the shit guns, but you get the idea. The only times I see this showing up in subsequent games past Black Ops, the game makes a big deal out of them, like, "Oh, bro, you gotta break open this crate that's marked on the fucking screen." Of course the game is still linear, but it's the most semi-linear I've ever seen in a COD campaign. The game also feeds you just the right amount of level-to-level variety to keep you engaged. Eviction, for example, starts in all these apartments, and then a mail office, and then a little industrial packing station, then you go into the streets, and then into the metro. It would have been a little too much street fighting if they threw you right into Heart of the Reich afterwards, so they throw some more Pacific your way, where you fight in a Japanese fucking castle. The pacing and variety, both done well. It knows when to not overwhelm the player, and it knows when something is starting to outstay its welcome. You still of course get your little cliche set pieces, the obligatory tank section, the obligatory plane/turret section, the obligatory enemy at the gate section in every single Russian campaign in every game ever made. But hey, at least you don't get a D-Day landing sequence. Oh wait, no, yeah, yes you do. These are all executed well though, and they don't really outstay their welcome. I was actually dreading recording Ring of Iron for this video, but I found myself having a good bit of fun. Mostly. World at War's gameplay was innovative without innovating. It was memorable in that it did enough differently to stand out, but not so much that it ended up being a confusing mess. It didn't try too hard, and as a result it turned out pretty smooth. What else am I forgetting? Oh my god, the fucking soundtrack! The World at War soundtrack is one of my favorite video game soundtracks ever, and subsequent games in the franchise have painfully underutilized their music. This isn't just my favorite soundtrack because the beats in Black Cats are cool, it's my favorite because of how it's implemented and how it sets the tone of the game. There are two specific examples that I want to go in depth with here. One from the Pacific Theater and one from the Russian Theater. The Pacific admittedly is the weaker link in the soundtrack here, and I feel like they really dropped the ball with some places, but there's one moment in Relentless that really stands out to me. You're finished assaulting some artillery batteries to allow your tanks to move up, and as you're making your way to a Japanese tunnel network, a flamethrower Sherman arrives to support you. This could have very easily been an incredibly wanky moment as some shit victory music plays. But instead you get this. The mood of this segment is unparalleled in the rest of the Pacific campaign. This set piece is downright unsettling. An encounter with a flamethrower tank is obviously terrifying, and this song fits it so well. There is, however, no single mission that comes close to the perfection of Eviction. Eviction is a masterpiece of thematic soundtrack implementation, and it nails the sheer surreality of the fighting in 1945 Germany. The Fade from Black opener already tells you everything. The game is quiet and the soundtrack takes a backseat as this prisoner is just executed in front of you. As you get your first look at the city you're tearing apart, this low somber drone files in. The room-by-room fighting as you make your way to street level could have very easily been some energetic shootout, but this song just continues through the whole sequence. And all the while the ambience of the German propaganda radio echoes through the building, gradually getting louder. The final sequence inside the building is almost entirely backed by the German radio. This twisted orchestra is the last thing the enemy hears as they fight to the last. Okay, maybe a little too artsy, but it was a deliberate inclusion by the developers, and it's really fucking cool. And then you hit the street. This song's entire purpose is to make the player fight like mad. The Germans are desperately fleeing. This song is a deliberate power trip. It encompasses insanity. And then the metro part hits, and it's not as cool, but I mean, it's okay, it's alright. There's tons of moments like this. The fighting in and around the Reichstag is so memorable because of its music. The Battle of Seelow wouldn't be the same without this fucking tune. I do have some criticism about the soundtrack though, and it lies entirely with the music done in the final stand at Shuri Castle. You just lost a main character, depending on who you saved. And you're up against an overwhelming Japanese counterattack, and they play the most generic, boring battle track of the whole campaign. They kick it up at the end with a better track, but it feels like there's no thought put into it. There's no atmosphere, it's just another big battle. It feels kind of rushed. I've taken it upon myself to edit together a better soundtrack for this battle, and I don't know, just listen for yourself.
Keep those hands up. Shit!
Call of Duty World at War is so memorable because of its soundtrack. Everyone says it's the best in the series, and I'm genuinely mad that future installments completely failed to capitalize on the power of a good soundtrack. They've demonstrated that they can execute it extremely well, and it's just beyond me that they've completely disregarded it. Still nowhere near as bad as COD World War II, like no wonder no one remembers this! I actually want to give COD World War II's soundtrack a little bit of credit because there's like 30 seconds of good music in the main menu theme. Like, this violin segment is really cool. And then it's just immediately ruined by this wanky, bombastic fucking shit. So yeah, World at War is really good, and everything that made it good was forgotten by the developers. This video is a cry for help. I want games to be like this again. I want COD World War II out of my fucking head. I just remaster Call of Duty World at War. I'll do anything. I'll pay you anything.